Hello and welcome to Garibaldi Red, the Nottingham Forest podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. My name is Matt Davis and we are streaming live on Facebook as normal. And you can obviously catch us on all other podcast platforms. We are here today with Sky Sports presenter and former Red returning to the show, David Prutton. Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, Matt. How are you? It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. The sun's streaming in, which up north doesn't necessarily always happen. But no, it's good. How are you, mate? You all good?
Yeah, good. I mean, last time we had you on was like as low as it can be.
You're a lot more chipper, I'll say that. That smile's come back to your face, which is lovely to see.
Good. So, as ever, streaming on Facebook. So if you've got a question for David, do put them to us. Keep them nice because I won't put them all to him. But if you've got any questions about what's happening with the club and his thoughts on general stuff around the championship, do drop them in. We got you on because you were covering the game for Sky Sports, so you had a good look at it. Forest and Cardiff too. What did you make of it, just in terms of Forest's performance? It was very Jekyll and Hyde, but it just wasn't too great overall, was it?
It was. They gave themselves a mountain to climb, so the cliche goes, after giving away goals such as that in the first half. It seemed to be lacking intensity and energy, which I think if you're a fan would be frustrating to watch. The goals that were conceded, like anything, when you watch a goal, you can pull it apart afterwards, but absolutely avoidable from the point of view of the first one. Whoever's marking Kiefer Moore, with regard to how it's set up pre-match, has just got to make sure that you get as close as possible. I know that sounds incredibly straightforward, especially more so after the event, but a ball into the box that lands on and around the 6-yard box that's headed in pretty much unchallenged is something that no defence should allow themselves that situation to get into. Obviously, if Lewis Grabban scores that wonderful chance, which, as we know, 9 times out of 10 he would, then that puts it back to 1-1, and then suddenly you've got a different game. And it's amazing how little instances such as that in goals can change a game. But again, Kiefer Moore getting his second, again, relative freedom of the 6-yard box is something that once you get to half time and break it down and think about it, and when the lads get back in, there'd have been a lot of, you'd like to think that not finger pointed, but a discussion and an inquest to say, well, I mean, who's marking who's meant to be picking up this obvious threat of someone like a Kiefer Moore. And then second half, much better, as Sabri said after the game, much better. And the things that he's looking for, the prerequisites, that the very basic element of putting one foot in front of the other, getting close to the opposition, and being in a position where you can affect the opposition. They did that a lot more. Ryan Yates, obviously, another very, very good chance. And again, another position where that could have changed the game. So overall, it's a frustrating afternoon. But the positives that you take are that second half performance and how Forest went about that. And that's what they've got to keep hold of going into the next game.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a load of questions for you already, a couple relating to that game. Ryan Roworth, apologies if we got that wrong, says, do you think we should set up as we did in the second half against Cardiff, playing more attacking with 2 strikers? Do you think he has to play 4-4-2 against Huddersfield, who are next up, almost for as much as self-preservation? So he gets to the point where he looks a bit too stubborn if he doesn't change. Do you think? Or do you have to keep going with what's got you so far?
Well, it's amazing, isn't it, what can be... courage and conviction can be, it depends if you're looking at it in a positive or negative way. If you're looking at a positive way, that is the courage to stick to your guns, i.e. what Sabri wants to do and how he wants to set his team up. If you're looking at it in a negative way, that's seen as stubborn and not being able to perhaps change your approach and the different tactic you're going to get. We've spoken about something, Matt, and we were chatting at the very end of the season about perhaps a section of Forest fans being frustrated that there isn't that slight change in approach. When things aren't particularly going your way. I think getting Lyle on the pitch, obviously a fully fit Joe Lolly affects Forest positively no end. So you can't, there's a slight disappointment with that, but the fact that you do see Lyle Taylor come on and didn't get many gilt-edged chances from what I remember, but did approach trying to occupy the defence in perhaps a way we hadn't seen from the opening half an hour or so. So I think between him and Lewis Grabban, you've got 2 well, we know what Lewis can do at this level. Lyle hit the ground running at the start of last season with Charlton, and has come to a football club with more stature. I think more kind of expectation and more eyes pointed at him, wondering what he's going to deliver and how he's going to deliver it. And I think, as we know, Forest fans have a lot of patience with new players, and hopefully that'll be rewarded sooner rather than later. So I think getting both of them on the pitch was a nice way of looking at and seeing what could be a way of going forward. But obviously off the back of that, as you look at the delivery, it's not just about strikers not taking chances, but it's about the whole full team creating opportunities and balls in, like Luke Freeman's a phenomenal cross that led to that chance for Lewis in the first half. More of that, you get the feeling that Lyle and Lewis would really thrive off that.
What did you make of the Lolly sub from a former player's point of view? So, the manager said afterwards that he wasn't injured and it was tactical. If you're a player in the dressing room, is that going to ruffle a few feathers and annoy a few players, or are the better pros going to shake it off? Like Lolly seems a great pro, but do you think it might?
Yeah,
a couple.
That's what. Yeah, I mean, full respect to Joe and that kind of way of. It's obviously that there's people watching at home, that it's not a full stadium, but the position where that happens, and I think the perception of that early substitution has changed nowadays, hasn't it? Because I think the tactical side of the manager saying, "Oh, we need to change it," especially when you're in a position where you're 2-0 down. Then something a lot of managers of a certain generation would wait till half time and make a change. But he wanted to get Lyle on the pitch, therefore you get possibly 10 or so more minutes to see how those two interact up front, and then you've got 15 minutes obviously at half time to be able to kind of tweak that and assess what you've seen so far. But I thought the reaction was fine. We've seen that before, haven't we? People come off and throw the toys out the pram. But as you say, whenever I've read Joe's comments or heard him being interviewed, or when I've seen him play, he looks like a very he's obviously a very bright fella, and obviously understands that perception of if he comes off and throws his toys out of his pram, does that make it look slightly more complicated for the manager's situation? And I'm not saying that he thought about all this as he gets subbed, but I think the maturity that he showed for that decision was to be applauded. But he is such a key player for Forest, isn't he? And he has been such a key player for a while, which that statement perhaps shows that in this situation that they find themselves in, slightly sticky, slightly tricky at the start of this season, that nobody is untouchable in that starting 11.
There's a couple of people asking you if you think Forest have been found out. John Rowland said it, and also I'll read Danny Coulson's comment out here. Would you agree that we've been found out? Neil Harris mentions he knew how we were going to set up before a ball was kicked. Do you think that's the case, or is it more that Forest's formation can work, but the players actually have to deliver it, and they're not really delivering it at the moment?
Well, they're not, but and I'm sure Forest fans would agree with this. Neil knows exactly what he's saying there, doesn't he? That hint of mischief that comes with the way that he approached his football career. Yes, he played for Forest, but I presume he spent a lot more time getting up Forest fans' noses as an opposition player, didn't he? Because that was that way that he played. That was part and parcel of his makeup, and I can understand why he's saying that. And it always, it's did he say that pre or post match?
I think it was post match, which is obviously easy to say, isn't it?
It's wonderful, isn't it? Yeah, we won 2-0. I saw it come in. The master plan sorted, and like I said, I understand the mischief that comes with that. But I think you're absolutely right, Matt. When it works, and that's testament to the way that he sets the players up. But fundamentally, how a manager is perceived at a football club, and how his success is gauged is by the performances of the players on the pitch. The way that, as I said, you look at the 2 goals, that's nothing to do with tactics, formation, what the manager said to them. That's as simple as players taking responsibility, which they didn't in that instance. But you do get games like that. You absolutely do get games like that where almost that aberration where everyone comes in scratching their head going, well, normally you would pick that player up. Normally you would, as you're coming out, Yuri Ribeiro, know that Kiefer Moore's behind you, because even that split second where he's looked and he's seen him, yet you can't mitigate for the non-decision that was made of not going with him. So when you say about being found out, he can only work with the players that he's got. I think the players that he's got on paper have the potential to be competitive in the top 6. I absolutely do. But we looked at it before, and when we look at putting on a game, and this is not kind of pulling back the curtain and showing you what the Wizard of Oz looks like, but you look at little statistical anomalies. You look at how teams set up. We looked at it last season when we covered Forest. That element of not dominating possession and they being more comfortable with that. Now, if you've got that element of player that likes to play counter-attacking, and when you've got Lyle Taylor now in the team who doesn't mind doing that bit, running beyond, stretching the team, then maybe, just maybe, that tweak to being able to do that more often than not helps because of the personnel that you've now got in the side. But I don't think it's a case of being found out. I think given what we've seen of teams getting promoted out of the Championship for possibly the last decade, the very simple fact is it's those consistent sides, the sides that can grind through it, the sides that, as I mentioned before, I think we've mentioned it on here before, Matt, that can play Leeds on a Saturday tea time and turn them over, yet can also play Rotherham at home midweek and then turn them over as well. That's possibly where, this is me presuming what a Forest fan would think and where their frustration comes from. That swing in the pendulum from fantastic, all-encompassing, energetic, powerful, and composed into not being able to take chances in another game and seeing 3 points slip through your fingers. It's the inconsistency of the performance, I think, that would be frustrating.
There's a couple of questions that are coming that are sort of related in terms of arguably giving players an excuse, but also being legitimate. So I'll put them to you and see what you think. Greg Orham asks, how much do you think blowing the playoffs will be affecting the players and the club still? And also Aidan Fisher says, do you think not having the fans there is one of the reasons players are not performing? Is that giving players an excuse, or do you think that's legitimate, what those guys are asking?
I think there's two very legitimate points there. Given, and you've already mentioned it as we were chatting at the top of how the reaction to that final day was keenly felt, and I had messages across the board from football Forest fans that I know pretty well, some that I class as colleagues, some that I've come across and over the course of the last few years, and it was the same as you. I could tell by the look on your face that astonished disappointment, deflation of how on earth that had happened. And we can talk about it, and it was we chatted about it before the game on Saturday. But I think if that happens and Forest then hit the ground running, and suddenly you off the back of a week where you've won 3 games, then it's like, well done, boo, banished. Let's move on from that. So I think there is still an element of wanting to get that first win, which does help to start chalking away what had gone before. And I think from the fans' point of view, having been in a position where you understand what that stadium is like when it is absolutely buzzing and the fans are right behind you, then I do think it makes a hell of a difference. We were chatting to Lee Johnson, and I was asking him about leading a team and what players were like and staff were like coming off the back of lockdown and everything that's involved with that. And I think, and this is obviously when you talk about getting back to the working world, which if you are a professional footballer, that is your working world, obviously. It's not saving lives, except I understand it's not governmental. It's not something as kind of seriously and like super serious and important as that. I absolutely, but it's very important to us and extremely important to the people that watch and follow this football team. And I think maybe, just maybe, we think that it's, well, pick it up again, get back on the football pitch, do what you're paid to do. Maybe there are underlying subconscious mental little hurdles that these players, some will be absolutely fine, some will need to take a bit longer to work towards that we presume that playing football would be the most simple thing to do, and that's not been the case. But then that's the other side, like I said, because it's vocational, because it is a professional footballer, you've got to clear your mind, you've got to get to the next game, and you've got to be able to make sure that you can perform. And the good thing is for Forest and the players involved, that next game comes extremely quickly, and you can have a dodgy week, a dodgy opening few days like they have. that could be very quickly banished within a fortnight because of the sheer volume of games.
While you were talking, I scribbled down Lee Johnson, actually. One of his post-match comments I thought was interesting about leadership and how relaxed they were in the tunnel. I mean, it's easy for me to pile on after they've lost again, but do you see a team that maybe is lacking a bit of leadership and is a bit quiet on the pitch?
I think if you look at the personalities, as we've mentioned, Lewis, you mentioned Lyle Taylor. He's by no means a shrinking violet at all, is he? And I mean that in the most complimentary sense. Joe Lolly, I would presume he would be a vocal presence on the pitch. You've got players in the back line that are both statuesque in physicality and within the team. So I don't know. It's a tough one, that, because of what, again, like we said, you send a team out after a team talk into a very quiet tunnel onto a very quiet pitch in a very quiet stadium. That tub thumping, that kind of chest bumping type way of coming out onto a football pitch. Something that we all know that Michael Dawson does, and he's not in his sleep, because he'd never get any sleep, would he, if he was shouting about the team performing. But that type of player, Ben Watson, you know what I mean? Players that simple, unsophisticated, efficient, but knowledgeable enough to know that different players need to be managed in different ways. Perhaps there is an element of that, and having covered games as we do from the studio, but also having been to a couple of games, it is quite surreal to hear or not hear as much, or hear less than what you think you possibly would in a football game. But there's absolutely no doubt at all that the emotion that comes from the fans being in the stadium has an effect. But I don't think Forest can stand behind that, because it's the same for every single football team in English football, most football teams in world football now, and you've just got to get on with it.
You mentioned Watson. I was going to ask you about another central midfielder. We were talking when we were WhatsApping about getting you on here about Ryan Yates, and I sort of compared him to you a bit. And you said God loves a trier, but Forest fans are on his back in the sense that he's not super dynamic. He's not Frank Lampard or anyone like that. But I wrote a piece kind of leaping to his defence, because I think that he is a good player who does a good job for the team, and he was actually Forest's best player in the second half, in a sense, I thought. What do you think about this thing of Forest fans getting on Yates's back? Is that unfair? But
there's always, and I'm not saying it's premeditated at all, but or there's any form of mob mentality in it, but that's always the case. It always happens to one player, if not a couple. Some players, for some reason, become a totem of the fans' frustration. I think he had a glorious chance, didn't he, in the second half? That goes in. That slightly changes a bit of the preconception about him. But I think if you take the performance across the board from Saturday of the 11, it was objectively not very good as a collective. Like I said, that's that one game in isolation. You hope as a fan that you can put that to bed, and what becomes imperative at the start of the next game is for that first 15-20 minutes as you incrementally get towards half time is. And I'm not saying that for 1 second you go up, you blow apart whatever the manager wants tactically, but you get yourself about the pitch, you tear ass around like your life depends on it. There's nothing that'll never change, no matter how gloriously intricate some football teams are in world football. I remember Paul Hart saying this to us a very long time ago, and apologies for people watching to bring up managers and players of years gone by, but I know how well respected Paul was as both a coach and a player at Forest. But there's no substitute for that legwork of putting one foot in front of the other and getting around the pitch, showing the tenacity to be able to affect the opposition when things aren't going well. And I'm sure fans we'd all take the beautiful game, wouldn't we? We'd all take the intricate passing that slices teams apart. But as a close substitute for that, we'll take effort and endeavour every single day of the week. And I think for people to get on Ryan's back, I understand that it's part and parcel of football. Is it fair? I don't think so. He doesn't strike me as the type of player, from whenever I've seen him play, that would draw the ire of the fans by looking like he doesn't care, looking like he's not prepared to put the work in. If you talk about the fundamental qualities of a player and what he's good at, if you're expecting him to be a player that slices apart the defence from his vantage point in midfield, then if that's something he can't do, I mean, if with that sense of that very tenuous comparison between me and him, and as I was scratching my head going, Christ, poor sod, he didn't need any more people jumping on the top of him, does he? But I would have some games where those passes that you try would come off. But more often, I'd like to think that as you get older, you realise that your game is based on being able to communicate, to be able to be a good teammate, be able to get about the pitch, and disrupt the opposition. And then you let the likes of a Lolly be the man that helps to pull apart the opposition. So it's I understand, and I'm sure I'm not saying it would be particularly pleasant for Ryan, but the only way that you dispel the doubters or the people that cast aspersions on your particular role in the team is to get your backside on the pitch as much as you possibly can and do as much in your physical capabilities and in your control to win them over. Because I think if you do come through something like this and you do earn the respect of the fans or kind of quell that sense of frustration, then they respect you more for working through that. Yeah,
I mean, as a former pro who's had the highs and the lows, what would your advice be to him at this time, assuming he's aware that people are on his back? What would you say to him?
That's it's tough because I'm very much of the thought process that will always be the case. You'll have people that perhaps respect and appreciate a portion of what you did, and you'll have people that no matter what you did won't ever get on board. And that's not just football. And let's not get too deep on this. That's just life in general. You know what I mean? Pleasing everyone all of the time is an absolutely impossible task. So the minute you take your head away from that and think, well, I'll box that off because that's not going to happen. So he needs to make sure, like if there was any advice to give, the reason that he's become a professional footballer or got to the stage where he can call himself a professional footballer is by being armor plated to certain aspects of what it's about. You're open to criticism. You're open to people saying, I don't like him. Why? I don't know, just don't. And you're never going to change people's opinion in that case. But people that go, well, I think he does a good job. And they could, so the pros and cons can be justified to the far end of wherever by that sheer, the sheer bottom line of whether a fan likes you or doesn't like you. If a manager, the validation from a manager is he puts you on the pitch. After that, it's your responsibility to be able to be as effective as possible. And I just think, as I said, this period, and I know that I understand the frustration perhaps of take what we were talking about Saturday. And this is again me not presuming that Forest fans dial in their absolute thousands just to see what we talk about before the game, because the build-up's called a build-up for a reason. The game is the most important thing, isn't it? The most important thing that people are watching for. But you look at how last season ended and you look at how this season ended, and the only reason you make a link is because of how short it's been. It's been such a quick turnaround to try and get Forest back on the pitch to start righting those wrongs. Sabri's changed his staff, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But Ryan's been a part of a squad and a team that has been in that position, and I think to a man, it's a group way of trying to put that right and trying to get a portion of the fan base back on side, because the fans are absolutely 100% within the rights to be frustrated. Absolutely.
Let's talk about signings then and trying to turn it around and get the season going. Scott McKenna, the Aberdeen and Scotland centre halves, set to sign today. By the sound of it, he's pretty uncompromising, that kind of rose-ed centre half. Is that
maybe the leader that you're talking about?
Yeah, I was going to say, is that something that you've seen missing from the team? Maybe that might just be the thing that tips them that extra 2 or 3% to get them winning a game.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I've been in teams where a player of this ilk comes in such as that, and it's that breath of fresh air element of, like I say. I mean, as much as we like, and pardon me if I hope I'm not doing Scott a disservice here. We love the beautiful game being played out from the back, don't we? We also like it as football fans when it's 70 yards away from your goal. You're not kind of relentlessly bringing pressure up. And if he's a man that can come in that kind of ilk of a Michael Dawson that organises, that can affect play further up the pitch, that can get messages through the different thirds of the team, that means that they do become hard to beat. Because I think that's the first port of call for any team, I think, that wants to be successful, especially this season in the Championship. Because yes, it's only very much in its infancy, And you look at the teams, the likes of Reading, Luton, that have, we talk about 100% records. It's a couple of games in. You know what I mean? It's wonderful if you're there. If you're there at the end of the season, different kettle of fish. But it's nice to be there at the start of the season. But you look at being hard to beat in a division which I think is as open as we've seen for quite a few seasons. That's where Nottingham Forest need to start with. Be that solid, have that solid foundation. That if you're not going to win games in the prettiest of fashions, then you're going to grind games out because you know that you're capable of keeping a clean sheet. And as I said, Lewis Grabban scores goals. Lyle Taylor can score goals. Needs to get up and running. We get. Forest get Joe Lolly back fighting fit, and then it gives you a fighting chance, which is it's a good starting place to be, especially in the Championship. I think
that's going to be 10 signings now. It's interesting that they were so close.
It's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot.
Yeah, well, they were so close last season to getting in the playoffs. Do you think Sabri's seen something there? We talked about a hangover that he thought bigger changes are needed than perhaps we suspected after that Stoke game.
Do you think in the sense of it being
mentally, I think, as much as anything.
You pull out a portion, you drop them out, in comes a portion that wasn't part of something.
Yeah, that's what
and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'd hate to think this is seen as anything other than hopefully. And obviously, my history of Forest goes a long, long way back, and I understand what team we were and what squad we were back then. Absolutely. But given the improvements that we saw under Sabri last season, yes, it was bitterly disappointing, the final game. But that's not to say that we damn this squad, this manager, the current setup purely on one game. It's that the lead up to that game meant that there was the outside chance that something might happen that was pretty miraculous, which it ended up doing, miraculous in a bad way, which I don't quite think makes sense, doesn't it? Because the definition of a miracle is a positive thing. So that kind of broad sea change of personnel, as you say, 10 players coming in, means that you've got a good chance of being able to go into these games and not have someone going, "Oh yeah, but remember what happened," or subconsciously thinking about it. But the other side of it is you've got players that have to be mentally tough about it. And again, it's easy to say, sat watching from our vantage point, whether you're at home watching it or whether we're trying to take it in and pull it apart before, during, and after the game. But there's got to be a moving on, hasn't there? And if that involves different personnel, then great. If it involves players coming through that, then I think they'll be strong off the back of it. And just coming off the comment that I've just seen there about them being bullied, I think especially if you look at the game Saturday, there was a tendency to do that. Martin's absolutely right. That big, strong, physical, central defender helps playing against a Kiefer Moore, doesn't it? And I know I've mentioned Kiefer quite a lot, and having seen his games for Wales and how we led the line off the back of last season for Wigan, he's really grown into a player that not only is big and physical, but uses his body in the right way, doesn't he? And I think, again, if you're trying to look at it completely objectively, you look at the game, you look at the goals, the frustration that Forest fans will have with the goals of, look how tall he is. And I'm sorry to make it sound like common sense in Sunday League football, but look how big he is, and they kick the ball high into the box. Get somebody near him that wants to make sure that he doesn't get on the end of that cross. And if someone like a McKenna's there, bawling and shouting, "You pick him, you get him," and I did well not to swear there. You know what I mean? You everyone knows what their jobs are, but there's someone there to reiterate what those jobs are. Then, like I said, you've got half a chance of being in a football game more often than not.
True. As from a player's point of view, if you're a player from last season and you see 10 new signings coming in, what kind of reaction from your experience do you think that garners, positive or negative?
Got to see it as a challenge. Got to see it as a challenge. If you see your backside with it, you've got to pull yourself out of that. It's a team game. If your position's under threat, because football's ever evolving, constantly changing, you might have 10 games where you're really, really good, and suddenly someone else comes in, and that 10 games are forgotten, and you're suddenly having to bide your time a little bit. You've got to see it as nothing other than a challenge. If you're if there's an element of feeling sorry for yourself, then, like I said, it's got to be boxed off. Football's inherently competitive. That's what it is on a daily basis. That's what makes you as a footballer feel alive every single day. You come in, you've got to be better than the person that wants your shirt. And if you don't buy into that, it's completely the wrong profession for you.
True. I was going to put another comment up here about signings being too much and FFP, field 3 teams. How does Sabri keep these players happy? I know he's boxed off quite a few of them and pushed them away to the under-23s. Is it hard to keep the morale kind of chipper, especially when you're not winning? What's it going to be like in the dressing room, do you think?
It's funny, when I read the end of that, I thought it said FF something else, not FFP.
No, I did read it twice.
Yeah, I thought that could. I thought that was quite descriptive. It's a lot. No, I think Craig's absolutely right. I mean, that sense of it helps to perhaps banish memories of games gone by, but that's where a manager really does away from a football pitch and his corn, doesn't he? Big squads, keeping big squads happy is tough, especially if you've got if the dynamic of it isn't quite right, and especially when you look at performances and results where you could quite rightly have players knocking on the door saying, "Come on, boss, where's my chance?" The team's not pulling up trees. Sorry for the pun, but they're so therefore. It's easier, like you say, Matt. It's easier to park players in say the 23s when the first team are doing well and getting results. Less easy when things aren't going so well, because suddenly the dynamic, like I said, of players thinking that they should be given another fair crack at it means that it's tough for the manager. I think on the one hand, if you're looking at it, you think, well, he's obviously currying favour with the powers that be that they've allowed him to do that much business. I think it's a dangerous game if those players are coming in and hitting the ground running and really making a difference. Then you, as Craig says, you end up with a big squad that's not answering the questions that you're being posed. So I think with that, only time will tell. I think this extended transfer window means that they've still got enough time to be able to trim the squad down to make it as lean enough to be competitive. Lean enough to be manageable, but big enough to be competitive. As in, if you have players not performing on a weekly basis, you can change a fair chunk of them.
I'll keep asking David other stuff. I'd be interested just in the comments, and apologies to people who are listening to this after the event. If people want to drop in their best back 3 or back 4, just to see who they think the best defensive combination is now. With Forest having so many centre halves, I think up to 8 centre halves now. So if people want to drop that in the comments, I might read a few out.
They could go full Stoke and go for 4 centre halves. That gives you a sense of a solid foundation, wouldn't it? That.
Where do you, obviously you know Michael Dawson well, and he's not in the team at the moment. And even if he's not in the team, what role do you think someone like a Michael Dawson has in trying to get this team playing again how we know they can?
Huge. I think knowing him like I do and knowing the standards that he set for himself over the course of his career means that there'll be a sense of frustration with the results and perhaps the first half performance. But he's seen enough football across his years at all different levels to know that it can very quickly turn around. You suddenly, like I said, we suddenly get to the end of. I say suddenly, it's over a month away, but you get to the end of October with all the games that are involved, and the landscape could be completely different. The players that have been brought in, maybe they get a bit more chance to settle in and meld into what Sabri wants. Sabri looks at perhaps playing a 2 up front, and suddenly you get 2 players clicking off each other that start scoring goals. I think from Michael's point of view, he's, like I said, he's got high standards both on and off the pitch in training. He's got a great way of carrying himself, which I'm sure if any Forest fans have come across him in either spell will know that he's that big kind of gregarious smile that draws you in, stands him in good stead to maintain that kind of levity about the place. But he's that's me not saying that he hasn't got it in him to dig someone out, because I've seen it, he absolutely has. So it's imperative that he plays a big role, and getting to the age that he's got, perhaps wanting to play more games, but understanding where physically that might not be the case. I think that'll be something that he'll no doubt be working on and understanding himself. But he's one of the players I've come across that absolutely understands that the group is the most important thing. And maybe Sabri will lean on someone like Dors to help mutually get each other through these slightly leaner times, if you like.
Just read out a few of these suggested defences. I mean, we've got Dan Smith, Christie, So, Dawson, McKenna, Ribeiro. I'd forgotten about Cyrus Christie, which is ridiculous because he only signed last week, but he hasn't made his debut yet. Keith, Crick, So, Worrell, McKenna, Greg Oram, Christie, McKenna, Worrell, Ribeiro, and Paul Young, not having enough squad depth, caught us out. Best back four on paper would be Christie, Worrell, McKenna, and Ribeiro. Fair bit of consistency there.
There's and I tell you what as well, there's with, especially if you look at Christie, Worrell and McKenna, the experience is there, isn't it? You look at what Cyrus did. I played with Cyrus a long time ago, you probably won't remember, at Coventry, but he had the makings of a very good player back then. And I think as his career's progressed, and that changing way of a perception of what a fullback can do on a football pitch, I think he'll be here with the experience of what he's had over recent seasons at big clubs, but also having that bit between his teeth to really hit the ground and prove himself. I'd like to think that'd be the case. He always struck me as that type of player that was determined and ambitious enough to not only do it for himself, but to do it for his team and prove to people around him that he's worthy of that place in the team. So I think, as you say, if suddenly you bring Christie in and you bring McKenna in, who has got experience, both of them, of international football at the highest level, then I think suddenly that changes the makeup, doesn't it, of the team? And suddenly maybe you look at that and you sit back and go, like this, solid, I like this. And maybe then you do have, say, if a Ribeiro's there at left back, you've got somebody keeping hold of him and managing his role within the team. And that's sometimes players need that. And there's absolutely no disgrace in that about a centre-half helping a full-back and vice versa, because like we said earlier on, Matt, some are more vocal, some like to just get on with their job, not be in a selfish way, but get on with their role of, right, I'm a fullback, I need to do this, the manager wants me to do that, I've got to take care of this winger today, this wide midfielder. And sometimes doesn't need a help positionally and communication-wise. And that's how the different dynamics and the chemistry of a back four perhaps dovetails.
Let's move on to coaching then. Obviously, Chris Watson, Chris Cohen. Chris Watson's someone I work with. Chris Cohen is...
is he a good football coach? Is he any good?
He's a decent player. I played with him a few years better than me. Chris Cohen, who did play for Nottingham Forest and worked for them for 13 years, has left the club to go to Luton as a first-team coach. I don't think I asked you this before. You weren't a teammate of his, but you might have you crossed paths with him in the game. He's got a great reputation. Yeah. What would you say about him and the move to Luton?
I think because if he's gone there as first-team coach, then again, Nathan's there. He's got the bit between his teeth. I like the way he goes about leading a football club. He's had his fingers not burnt but singed, hasn't he, by being at Stoke? So you can see he's desperate to make up for that with a Luton team club that he knows very, very well. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for Chris. But maybe there's a slight quizzical element of him going to them as a first-team coach. Has there been any response to that, Matt, from the point of view of, hang on, we've got a player here that's been part of the furniture, knows pretty well how the dynamics of the club run. Would he have been better hanging around? Was that ever a debate or a discussion?
Well, that's something I was going to ask you. A lot of fans have said that. A few commentators have said, why wasn't he in our first team setup? I don't think it was, because he'd only been Forest under-23s coach for about a year. Lamucci made this big shake-up in the summer and brought a lot of his own people in. I guess if you're a manager who he was obviously under huge pressure in the summer, I guess you go with what you know, don't you? And you want to bring your mates in who you've worked with before. So I can sort of see why, but I do feel like Forest missed a bit of a trick here, losing that coach to a championship rival. Do you agree with that, maybe? Yeah,
well, I mean, the proof will be in the pudding with regards to what it contributes on a daily basis to Luton. I think what you're saying is absolutely right. There's that, and we've spoken to enough managers, haven't we? And I've experienced it from a playing point of view, that kind of cabal that they get around them helps It's not just having good members of staff. And again, I've experienced different varying levels of this, where you can see relationship wise why a manager has a certain number two or a coach, and then you get him out on the pitch and you go, wow, it's not because of his coaching ability. It's because he's quite clearly got someone that's got his back through thick and thin, which is a manager's prerogative, especially this day and age where the views of owners, chief execs, etc., chairman seems to be at certain clubs shorter than ever. So I think you'd be disappointed having a player, which in this day and age, it's not the norm, is it? Having a player that's involved with the club for that length of time through different various roles. And what I've read on his farewell little bit is a statement I thought was really good, really good. I think we can get very cynical in football, can't we? We can get very pessimistic, and we can, and sometimes it's absolutely apt and thoroughly deserved. But when you hear someone that genuinely loved the experience that he's had, the ups, the downs, the things that Forest fans take on the chin by being heavily emotionally invested in that club, and you're married to the club for life as a fan. You might go through fallow periods and things, bits of it where metaphorically you're sleeping in separate beds and you're not talking to each other, but at the end of the day you're still tied to each other. But I think what Chris did and what Chris put out and how he said it was really touching, and I thought very, very apt and a nice fundamentally a nice thing to do off the back of the opportunities both personally and professionally Forest would have afforded him. But I'll be intrigued and I'm sure it'll be something that we all look at, follow his career closely and see how Luton are and how they progress, and what Nathan makes of him, what Paul makes of him, what the squad of players make of him. And I think time will tell whether Forest have missed the trick there or not.
Do you think it's a brave move by Cohen in the sense of job security? Being an under-23s coach is more secure than being a first-team coach. I mean, like you haven't taken that step, and not that people are immune from losing their jobs at Sky.
Oh, Christ, that one, yeah, correct, yeah, not in the slightest.
Do you think it's a brave move by Cohen? Because if things go wrong and Nathan Jones gets the bullet, then Chris Cohen might be out on his ear. So do you give him some credit for taking that step?
I absolutely do. Again, the pessimist says that if it goes the wrong way at Luton and suddenly he's manager of Luton, it's different, isn't it? It's that these are the sliding doors that are all around football. I think is a brave step. But I've got former teammates of mine that have ducked into the 23s and they've been in and out relatively quickly. So it's not a case of you get below the parapet and you're fine. I think the winds of change blow ever more blustery, don't they, through every single profession across the world, especially this day and age. So I think it is a brave move, as you say. But if he's ambitious and he gets the opportunity, and someone's actively said, "We want you, come and work for us," that's a great position to be in, isn't it? So like I said, whether it's borne out by a successful stint as Nathan's right-hand man, and again, Nathan, he worked at Brighton as the right-hand man and first-team coach for several different managers, had the chance to branch out on his own, took the plunge, had the chance to branch out into what you'd say a slightly bigger club in Stoke, didn't go well, got the chance again to go back to Luton, and seems to be grasping it with both hands. So I've got nothing but respect for someone like Chris that says, "Do you know what? I've done all this in football. I've got my badges. I'm working through different elements of what it means for me to be a better coach and man manager. Here's a chance to go and have a go right at the very kind of the coalface of what it all is."
A couple more quick topics before we just begin to wrap things up. I mean, there's a few comments here about the manager, and I think we'll ask you about them. Kyle Newquest says, how many more losses can Sabri afford before he's sacked? And then Dominic Marvel says, Sabri needs to get results next 2 games. He's gone. Is it a bit mad that we're talking about this 2 games into a season? Or is it a bit mad that we're not surprised we're talking about this 2 games into a season?
I think it falls directly in the middle. You can't be slightly in the middle, can you? You've got to be directly in the middle. I think because it is what we have grown accustomed to, and I'm not just saying in the last 6 months in football, but for however long. You know what I mean? It's football managers ultimately live and die by the results that are posted, and what helps in the elongation of a manager's tenure at a football club is performances. If they have many more like the first half, then I think then the manager starts to look vulnerable, because again and again, we're not trying to harp on about a game that's gone, but when the questions that are being asked of that particular side, of whether it comes down to desire and aptitude and the attitude to getting through 45 minutes worth of footballing work, then that's a tough one to answer for a manager, isn't it? You can, if you say the team shape's not quite right, we need to swap, that's something that you can actively change. If it's a case of him needing to go bonkers at half-time to make sure that people actually get around the pitch, that's a different problem entirely. I don't think, from the evidence that I've seen with my own eyes, that he's got a group of players that don't want to play for him. I get the sense that they absolutely do. I get a sense there's a certain fragility to the side, which is both the manager's responsibility and the player's responsibility to get over very, very quickly. But I think, even if you are perhaps at the top, it's tough. The Championship's slightly different. I always think that most managers that I've spoken to and had the pleasure to be able to spend time with have said they absolutely understand that you are only a finite amount of games from being in a tricky situation. And I wouldn't want to exacerbate the pressure that Sabri finds himself under at all, but he's got it within his grasp right now, moving into the game at the weekend. On Friday, where he can actively do as much as he can to change his position, to change his outlook, and then after that, he's got to trust in the players that he puts on the pitch. And if he's brought those players in, and he doesn't get the performance and the results that he needs, there's only one place that you can look at, and it's the decisions that he's made off his own back.
Somewhat ironically, myself and Dan, who does this with me, who's the kind of unseen guy, we were saying that we think it's time to produce a predictions league for this season for Forest results for myself and the guest. So people can play along here in the comments and drop their predictions in for Huddersfield v Forest on Friday night. So you're the perfect guest in a sense for this first up.
That's never been levelled at me ever.
No, or you're the worst football guest. Yeah. How do you see Huddersfield v Forest? How do you see it going on Friday?
Well, I think it's from Forest's point of view of trying to get their season up and running. I mean, when we talk about what's the perfect game, I think obviously the fact that, as we well know, fans out there, but getting away from the City ground and going to a Huddersfield side that have had their own change in the summer, haven't they? And with what Carlos did under the wing of Marcelo Bielsa, I'm being very intrigued to see what they're like live and how they go about it. But going away from home, there's that natural cliched setup where the home side will possibly see more of the ball. I think, as we well know, as has been well documented, that suits Forest to a certain degree. Given the changes that he made early on in the game, I would be very surprised if he didn't start with both Lyle Taylor and Lewis Grabban. Very surprised. Now, I'm not saying that suddenly cured all ills in the second half, but I think we saw a seed of something a little different, even though Lewis didn't complete the game. And maybe that dovetailing in with Lolly, if they managed to get the players that we're talking about in and ready and raring to go, suddenly you see Cyrus on the right-hand side. If McKenna's fit and firing and ready to come in and lead them from the back, then I think it gives Forest a hell of a good opportunity to get points on the board. It does, and because they're up against a Huddersfield side that had a differing set of emotions at the end of last season. Didn't score anywhere near enough goals to make that run in as comfortable as it possibly could be. And if you come up against a Forest defence that suddenly becomes that approaches the game and is a lot meaner, then I think it's a wonderful opportunity for them to really, like I said, get that first 3 points on the board, because I think by hook or by crook, and purely from as we well know, the way a football season goes, points on the board sooner rather than later is going to give them a hell of a chance of being at least in the playoffs.
Let's just read out a few of these predictions then. Glenn Page, Forest 3-1.
Please tell me they're all positive. Yeah, that's a good start. Glenn,
they're not all positive.
3-1. Come on.
They weren't last week either. Greg Oram, Huddersfield 1, Forest 1. Craig Shepherd, 2-0 loss again. James, NFFC, 3-1 Forest. Michael Cooper, this is the most depressing one yet. Huddersfield 1, Forest 0. Diakabi getting the winner after his loan spell last year. Martin Totterdale, we're going to concede 2. And Yvonne Wilson, you'd like a 0-0 or a 1-0 to us. I imagine you'd like a 1-0 more than a 0-0. I will say 1-1. And you have to give, I remember this for your Sky Sports column, but you have to give us a prediction for our league table. So what score are you going to say?
I do. Well, I'm going to go Forest away win. I'm going to do that. Not purely because
you're on a Forest podcast and you know that it's good PR.
You've seen right through me. No, not because it lends itself on this forum. Hopefully to nice warm thoughts as we progress through the day and into the weekend. But again, it playing against another side that's failed to pick up points, and given. The ever optimistic side of me thinks that because of how the first half went on Saturday, and what always drags us back to watching football, doesn't it, and keeps us there forever, is that ever present hope of it can't be as bad as that to start with, and I can't see it. I think they've got too many players, and potentially they've got too many players that have got the experience, the self respect, and the respect of being part of Forest as a team and a club to think that, sorry lads, this first 10, 15 minutes, we're hard to beat. We acquit ourselves accordingly. And we also know that people are watching. And again, this is not me trying to blow the trumpet of the coverage or anything like that, but we thoroughly enjoy having Forest on. And it's a perfect platform with nobody in the crowd to be able to watch it, to show people watching at home or wherever they're watching it that this is where their season starts, and that's the great thing about playing football. It's always there. That next game's always there to either carry on the wonderful things that you've done, put the things right that weren't so good in the previous game. So I'm going to say get Forest together with a meaner defence. I'll go Huddersfield 0, Forest 2. There you go.
Excellent. Now, talking of good PR,
these are contractually binding predictions. just these won't stand up in court. You do know that, don't you?
I very much do. Now, talking of good PR and perception among Forest fans, I wanted to finish on. We both wanted to finish on a tweet from a former teammate of yours.
Yes.
Which I'll direct people to. It was Alan Rogers, and he compared you. He said you were a bit too negative about the team, and he compared you to a sexual aid, shall we say. Wow. And you can search it out on Twitter. It's Alan Rogers, Rogers. I should give you right to reply. I mean, it made us laugh.
It did. And that, as we know, that forum and the internet is in general, it gives scope and platform to put forth opinion, which I absolutely understand and totally get. Knowing Tank like I did, he was a fantastic teammate. He good footballer as well, Tank. I really enjoyed playing with him. And that season, if I remember rightly, the season that Forest got promoted back to the Premier League, which would have been end of '98, mid '98, wasn't it?
97-98, yeah.
97-98. He was very much part of that, wasn't he? That powerful role that he played from fullback. Really nailed it down. And as I progressed into the first team, he was, and let me state this, like generationally, the way that young footballers came through, I presume it's changed slightly now, but he gave you no leeway. He kept you on your toes. I think I probably learned a fair few new swear words off the back of meeting him. But he was, if you proved yourself to be worthy of being one of his teammates, he would very much stand in the trenches next to you, obviously metaphorically, and go and look after you. And he was exactly that. He was funny and very outgoing and gregarious. And I think possibly his description from Saturday reflected that. And if Alan's tuning in or gets wind of this, as I said, I'm normally a natural optimist and somebody who looks for the bright side of stuff in life. And if I came across a slightly negative, Tank, I love that nickname, then I apologise for that, my friend, and we'll accentuate the positives as much as we can. But I tell you what has to happen with that as well, Matt, is you then can't watch 45 minutes of football that aptly reflects what you've just spoken about, because you can't pull the wool over fans' eyes. We can't sit there and then say, oh, well, they give it a go, when quite obviously it wasn't up to scratch. But that side of what Forest gave me and him, a platform to be able to play professional football for a mightily big football club, is something that I will always be eternally grateful for.
Let me ask you one last quick question on a tangent. That
is it to do with what he said? That
it's absolutely not, and I'm like nervous about what.
I think we've boxed that.
What's he?
Shift on.
Yeah, I was thinking, what's he going to say all the way through his answer there? We got through it. The one thing I was going to ask you, a more serious question, is: do you think it's a different world coming through now for a young player in terms of the characters and what goes on in dressing rooms? Is there any insight you can give viewers and listeners on that? Is it a completely different game?
I think the fundamentals are exactly the same of what younger players do need to learn through experience of being able to mentally and emotionally equip yourself for playing professional football, because even more so now, that forum for opinion, reflection, debate and analysis is huge. I remember if you were the first reaction you'd get if you were trying to get into a first team is the reaction of the first team players. You'd get ones if you were in the same position, wouldn't mind kicking you up in the air, just to show that you're not getting my shirt anytime soon. And if you are, you've got to absolutely fight for it. But you've also, and the other ones that would be a bit more welcoming and a bit more understanding of what it is to be a young player. That Forest first team that I managed to get into, with the likes of Dave Besant, Chris Bat-Williams, Andy Johnson, Alan Rogers, Marlon was coming through probably just before me, was a team of really quite stout, proper men, if you like, and you had to get in and hit the ground running and keep your mouth shut, and you were the butt of every single joke. That's probably set the tone for the rest of my life, Matt, to be honest, but it's I'm fine with that. But that's how we did it. And the only way you endeared yourself to these players was to perform and approach a game in the right way, and not be high maintenance, not be hysterical, not be someone that needed babysitting. But there was that mutual affection and fondness that grew by knowing that you could rely on each other. And I don't think that'll change. I think younger players coming in still need to do that. But I think that approach of what would be vaguely described as character building, I think has possibly changed. Which, given and to just sound a serious note for just a second, and there's a fair bit of that has changed for the better. I think you've absolutely got to say, because of what somebody classes as character building or a bit of a laugh can, to someone from a different point of view, with different background altogether, can be seen as something a bit more sinister, which I absolutely get and has been correctly addressed, I think, in a lot of departments. But I think it's that rite of passage, that time of life of growing from an adolescent where you were prepared for that type of environment, which is what Paul Hart did so well. And Gary Neville's spoken about it when he talks about the class of '92, and he talks about players coming through. It was stress testing whether it was conscious or unconscious by a manager, player, teammate, boss, etc. Of can he cope? Can they cope in this situation? And when you've got to play in front of crowds and be thrown open to the public forum of, we think you're either good, bad, or indifferent, you've got to make sure that you're competent and comfortable enough in yourself to be able to understand that you've got to deal with that. And I think that'll never change. But then the flip side of that is younger players come through very early now, don't they? And there's a whole heap of dynamics which I think the ones that get through and get to the very, very top, yes, it's a very cosseted and glorified profession and doesn't cure cancer, doesn't stop the world from, going into very murky waters in certain areas, but it does afford a lot of people a lot of joy. And at the very top end and across the divisions, as we've seen, is big business. So if players get through that and can become reliable professionals that lead themselves in the correct possible way, then that kind of maturity period has done its job. And I think there are nuggets and fundamentals in that will always be the same. But I loved it, and I look back on it with very, very fond memories. And whenever you have the opportunity to go back there and be in the tunnels and the dressing room, place smells exactly the same. It might have had a lick of paint in certain respects, but the memories and the walls and the kind of halls of that place contain lots of memories for far greater players than me. And I think we all naturally agree that it's a place that helps to define and develop players, and hopefully it will always remain that way.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for everyone who joined us and watched along. We had a load of comments. I'm sorry I didn't get to them all. We had way too many to get to this week. For those who are listening on Apple iTunes and any other podcast outlet, especially Apple iTunes, if you can give us a review, a good review, 5 stars, it really does make a difference. I know I say this all the time. There are so many Forest podcasts, it's ridiculous. So we do appreciate everyone who listens to this. David, thank you very much for joining us.
Matt, it's been a pleasure, my friend, and anytime. And we go into the weekend with open hearts, open minds, and full of optimism, don't we?
Yes, we absolutely do. Thank you for not ending my career without answers to the Alan Rodgers question.
Sorry, just throw the hand grenade at me. I'll be dodging it like that. It's fine.
Exactly. No, thank you very much. And thanks for everyone who watched along. We'll be back next week.